G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. I want to tell you about Australia, the bankrupt nation. It's an interesting idea, isn't it? But, when you consider that manufacturing industry is closing up shop and leaving the country, and they're shutting down a lot of small industries like fruit canning works and stuff that used to do things with the things that farmers produced. Vegetable processing factories, canneries, juicing factories, they're all closing up. And there's been a pretty savage drought just recently, which has come on top of a few years of floods, which came on top of a big long drought. It means that a lot of farmers are in the situation where they can really only hope to break even 1 year in 5, and perhaps every second break-even year, so 1 year in 10, they might actually have an operating profit that year. And the rest of the time, they're pretty much going to the bank or the finance company, and they're chewing into their equity by borrowing against the capital. And that means they've got to pay interest, at least, on the money that they're racking up in the debt file. And, well, here, as you can see, it's pretty green. But it's the last couple of days of February. There's not going to be a whole lot of growth at the end of summer. So the farmers are not going to be able to grow a whole lot of high protein, high feed value grass. They can't store any. They'll be lucky if they can get a reduced flock to survive over winter on this lot. What it's done is stop the livestock that they own right at the moment from needing to be hand fed, because they're running around in a green drought chasing a little bit of leafy pick all over the country. So in order for these farmers around here to make any money, they're going to have follow-up rains all through the winter and good rains in the spring, and then maybe by this time next year they might have some animals that they can sell, perhaps, if everything goes right. It's a bit of an iffy prospect. In the meantime, as we established, they're racking up debt. Go up to Queensland, the dingoes have beaten the sheep farmers. The cattle are worth nothing because nobody can afford to feed them, therefore nobody wants to buy them, so the price has dropped out of that market. The crops haven't grown in Western Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria because of the drought and the hot weather. And like I said, previously there were floods that stuffed up all the fences. You know, I wouldn't like to have a flood go through my fence either. It's only been doing its job for about 120 odd years. So that means there's no money coming off the land. It means there's no money being spent in the towns, the rural towns, and that means that the rural towns are really not buying a whole lot from the cities, and commercially everything's sort of winding back down. And the only people who've been trying to talk up the money-making potentiality used to be the miners, but of course commodity prices have fallen off and a lot of mines have closed down because, you know, costs exceed revenues. But then there were the real estate agents, and they've been thumping the tub and blowing the bugle and waving the flag about how all you have to do is buy yourself some real estate, get your foot in the door, and then the value of the land will go up, and therefore you'll be able to make money over the long run by selling whatever you buy now later on when it's worth a lot more money. And for a while that seemed to hold good, while ever anybody could kid themselves that the economy was still growing. However, other people thought these real estate agents were a bunch of wicked, evil miscreants behaving like two fleas arguing over which one owns the dog they both live on. And taken the point of view that every time a real estate agent sells a parcel of land for a higher markup, down in the capital city in Sydney there's a fella called the Valuer General, and he gets paid by the government to have a look at the resale value of land in all the different areas and come to a conclusion of what land is valued at, the unimproved value of it. So we're not looking at the houses, not looking at the fences, not looking at the buildings, not looking at the dams, not looking at anything, just the unimproved value of the land. And when I bought 100 acres or 40 hectares, I paid $40,000, $400 an acre, right? Okay, cool. As I've been paying rates on me 100 acres, this Valuer General's been looking at what the real estate agents were doing, and they've been telling me that my land is worth successively more and more and more money. So I'll show you some of the paperwork. Here we have the official valuation from the Department of Lands as at the 1st of the 7th 2006. So that was 16 years after I paid $40,000 for it, and they said that this place was, at that time, it was worth $62,600. So by paying me rates, which in those days were maybe $350, $400 a year, for 16 years I'd acquired $22,000 worth of increased value. Yeah? What's that, about 6-7% per year? Land value going up. But then, as we move from 2006, the official value for 2010, 4 years, and all of a sudden it's $105,000. Now $43,000 on top of $62,000, that's actually a 60% rise in value. And that was caused by cashed up yuppies and dinks, that's double income, no kids, that's what happens when two yuppies marry. Cashed up yuppies and dinks retiring from the cities, taking their superannuation pack, selling the McMansion, and they can't afford going for a sea change anymore because it's coastal filled up with tourist traps, so now they go for a tree change, or they were before the 2009 global financial crisis. Okay, now what that meant was that my rates suddenly rose from like $1 a day to nearly $1.50 a day, paying $500 or $600 a year in rates now. And I was really getting peeved with these real estate agents playing their little shell game, their Ponzi scheme, which requires ever more people to bring ever more money to the district to buy ever smaller blocks of land so the real estate agent can carve an ever increasing commission every bloody week of the year and put my rates up as a consequence. Well, the real estate agents don't really need to be stuck in the stocks every Saturday and have rotten eggs thrown at them, because in the last 3 or 4 years they have not had it their own way. So we take the 2010 land valuation of $105,000 and we put that to the side, and we have a look at the most recent one for 2013. Can you see that? $76,500. Somewhere in there, almost $30,000 has disappeared from what they said was a $105,000 asset. The land value of the hobby farms have gone down by 10% per year for 3 years. My rates, in theory, you'd think they should go down, wouldn't you? At least that would be according to a letter the Glen Innes 7 Council sent out to us explaining why they wanted to raise our rates. And I'll read it to you. How our rates work. Council rates are determined in accordance with the provisions of the Local Government Act 1993. This legislation provides the mechanisms to calculate rates and limits the income councils can derive from rates. Glen Innes 7 Council has 4 rating categories, which are then divided up into subcategories: farmland, residential including rural residential, mining and business. Rates are calculated annually and include a combination of ad valorem, base amounts and minimum rates. Ad valorem is the levying of rates by multiplying land value by a rate in the dollar. Base amounts are a set charge for every farmland assessment in the rating category plus an ad valorem amount. Minimum rates are a set minimum amount used for business, residential and mining categories, which may include an ad valorem amount depending on the value of your land. So I come under what they call residential ordinary, which is all land that you're allowed to build a dwelling on, which is not actually in a residential area, but it's not farmland and it's not business and it's not mining. So basically they've got a minimum amount, which It may include an ad valorem amount, depending on the value of your land. What that translates as is that if the Valuer General's assessment of my land goes up, my rates will go up as the ad valorem rises, and if the Valuer General says my land is worth less money, my rates will not decrease because they say they have a set minimum amount because they still have to provide the services. Cunning, isn't it? And the take-home message is that because the rural roads are in a hell of a mess and the rural bridges are in a hell of a mess, therefore the farmland rates are going to go up by 10% every year for 3 years in a row, and the residential rates are going to go up by 10% only 1 year. That's if council can manage to swing it under the provisions of the Local Government Act 1993, which allows councils to apply for a special rate variation to get them away from the rate pegging. And this rate pegging is basically an attempt by state government to prevent local councils from endlessly, annually, always increasing their rates. And that's been going on since the 1990s, so that now when you look at the revenue breakdown, where council gets its money, that big blue slice there, that's rates. That's 19% of all the revenue that council spends comes from rates. The red there is annual charges. The green is user charges and fees. The purple is interest and investment from revenue. And the other revenue is this aqua turquoise. The great big orange slice, 41% of the money council spends, is coming from federal and state grants. The expenditure of services, government and administration, 7%. Environment is 6%, that little green slice there. Public order, safety, health, water and sewages is 18%. 23 is community services, education and housing. Recreation and cultural is 10%. Roads, bridges and footpaths is 22%. Other services, 14%. And the scary thing is, over here on page 9, council has an annual income of around $24 million, of which $5 million is from general rates. Somewhere I saw that $5.4 million was from annual licences, fees and charges. So that gives us $10.5 million, which council spends from money they raise themselves. The other $14 million, it's coming from somewhere else. Most of it from federal grants. Whilst our income hasn't increased by more than the CPI, our costs continue to rise, and the gap between what is needed to be spent on providing services and managing our assets and what is available to be spent continues to increase. Rate pegging, cost shifting from other levels of government and increasing costs have all restricted our ability to meet existing and emerging community priorities for current incomes. Now, bearing that Local Government Act came in 1993, here we have a graph in which 1993 is pretty much their zero line for how much they think federal and state government grants should be, with 1.00%, meaning a complete year worth of grants, okay? So apparently 1991-92 they had, like 1.05% of a normal year, or 1.05 times a normal year. That's their normal year. We come squirtling down here. We had a pretty good year in 2009-10. Must have been some federal grants around to get Julia Gillard elected, I suppose. And here we are, 2014. We're approaching a 40% cut in how much state and federal grant money the local council has been receiving over a 10-year period. 40% down. What they tell us is that in red we have projected renewals, that's the stuff that they need to do. And in blue is planned renewals, that's the stuff they're actually got the money to do. Fixing infrastructure, roads, bridges, all the rest of it. So 2014, and if we keep going, running things the way we are, then we will actually break even in 2026, and then I'm afraid it gets worse again by 2027, and then radically worse in 2028, and the council continues to watch its infrastructure fall to pieces ever after. Right? I don't know how they figure that they're going to hit break-even point in 2026, but that's their theory. What council has suggested by raising the rates is that that's 2014. We're going to do about a quarter of the work we should do. Next year, because they'll have extra money, we're going to do about 4/5 of the work that we need to. And then by the time we get to 2018, we're going to be in front. 2019 we're going to be in front. And we're going to stay in front of how much maintenance we're doing compared to how much maintenance we need to do. And life should go pretty well for those people who live in the town and receive all the services. So that's the financial picture of what looks to be an otherwise fairly prosperous town on top of the Great Divide, 30 degrees south of the equator, in a place where it gets all the rain that's coming and going. From the east, sea breeze pushes a cloud up the mountain, cloud cools down, rains on the Great Divide. From the west, if a cloud's still got any moisture in it by the time it's come across the Australian continent, when it gets to the western foothills of the Great Divide, the wind pushes it up, and as it goes up it cools down, and when it gets up to the top of the Great Divide it rains on me. Right? Whatever rain's happening, we get some of it. So you'd have to think that this is one of the better areas. And land values around here have dropped by 10% per year for 3 years. Council is regularly spending 41% more money than it gets, and it achieves that by holding its hand out for state and federal grants. State government's broke, federal government's broke. The agricultural industry's flat out. They're only now in 2014 getting round to the idea of implementing some of the suggestions I made to a cousin of mine who was, he was in the National Bank working in Melbourne, and his next promotion was going to be overseas to become an international bankster. And during the 1994 to 2004 drought, I wrote to him and I suggested that his bank should declare a moratorium on repayments for all of its bankrupted farmers, people who owned a very small proportion of the land that they owed money on because they'd borrowed themselves into a corner. And I suggested that if those farmers were allowed to collect the dole or maybe even pension level payments, spend 2 or 3 days a week working on the fences and maintaining the farm so that it didn't completely become dilapidated in terms of its infrastructure, destock it, completely cease to farm it, allow the land to heal itself for 10 years, do 2 days a week either in the local technical and further education college or by correspondence on local Aboriginal land management practices. Then at the end of 10 years the land would have had a rest. The cockies, instead of feeling that the only way to provide for the wife and kids would be to take out an insurance policy and kill themselves 15 months after they took out the policy so that the insurance company has to pay out on it, therefore paying off the bank overdraft and leaving the missus and kids enough money to get a house in town. And it just lately, my son tells me he was talking to a Queenslander who claims to personally know 16 people who've shot themselves within 4 months because they couldn't pay the overdraft. Right? Instead of sending your farmers suicidal, just give them a 10-year moratorium on the dole, stay on the land, maintain the fences and the infrastructure, learn how to look after the land, and at the end of the 10 years then somebody can come along and reassess the property and decide whether that farmer would like to just piss off and let the bank sell it to somebody else, or whether the farmer would like to recommence paying interest payments and try and pay off the debt, now that they know how to manage that land without destroying that land. Because at the moment, we've just had 227 years of rapacious overseas interests and markets calling the tunes, pulling the puppet strings to induce our farmers to flog the land with sticks, rip it up with knives, bust it, burn it. They really have. They've overgrazed it, they've clear-felled it, they've flogged the land to try and keep paying the interest to the bank that they borrowed the money to buy the place from. And they're now at the end of their tether. If one bloke knows 16 who've killed themselves in 4 months, and you extrapolate that all over the places in Australia where that one rural farm supplier doesn't know people, there's an ethnic cleansing going on out there in redneck land. So something has got to give. This is a bankrupted nation. I don't think the local shire and council have actually broke even since the 1970s, which kind of rings true as I think about how many kilometres you used to have to drive before you ran over a pothole then, and how many kilometres you drive to run over a pothole in the Shire now. It synchronises quite well with an article I read in the New Scientist magazine, which suggested that in terms of access to jobs, resources, food, water and leisure time, the peak of industrial civilization globally was 1978, the year I left school. Since then, it's been getting worse. Right? And if my land value is dropping by $30,000 in 3 years of pretty good seasons around here, if that doesn't testify to the fact that the economy is imploding, it is winding down, there is no way you can make money out of expecting real estate prices to rise in Australia, not in inland Australia. It's not going to happen. And if you think the cities are going to continue to rise in land value when the inside of the nation is bankrupt, think again. Think again. It doesn't matter how many people you got working in a call centre or running around as taxi drivers and serving each other cups of coffee. None of that actually matters. What matters is, will the land support the people? And it won't support the people, not under the industrial, profit-based, market-driven, deficit-financed economic model that we have in place at the moment. That may not be what a lot of people want to hear, but them's the facts. And even though I don't expect my rates to go down, in fact, I really expect that within 5 years I'll probably be paying twice as much rates, and the potholes will be just as bad. Right? Because council won't be able to do much else, you know. They're just going to have to scrounge more money out of the people who are still on the land. Other than that, the prospect of the 100 acres I pay rates on suddenly being valued at $76,000 instead of $105,000, well, $30,000 less assessed land value shaves about $15,000 off the maximum size of the amount of money that my highly estranged wife dreams that she can theoretically attempt to claim from me in some kind of a potential property claim that she's been threatening to file in the family court for 20 bloody years. So yeah, I like seeing my land value decrease. A lot of people would think that's a bit of a perverse eccentricity, but that's how I look at it. I didn't buy the place to farm it. You can't farm on 100 acres. Cannot be done. Around here, You probably need, oh, a bloke who used to be mayor and a fella whose father used to be Shire president, he reckons you need at least $1 million worth of land, which is, depending on how good the land is, it's between 750 acres and about 1,500 acres. A lot of people would say you probably need $2 million worth, otherwise you're going to flog the country into a desert within one generation. There's not much money to be made in Australia anymore. Mining's over, farming's over, service industries are over, manufacturing's over. All that talk of a level playing field? Bullshit. All that talk of Joe Crocker shit hockey convincing the G20 they should adopt his profit target of 2% annual growth internationally on top of whatever they were going to grow. You watch, in 5 years' time they're going to be saying, oh look, the economy's only shrunk by 5%. If it hadn't have been for Joe Hockey, it would have shrunk by 7%. He must have got that right. Wasn't he a good bloke? But the fact is, we're bankrupt. We are bankrupt as a nation. We are bankrupt as a state. We are bankrupt as a council. I'm not self-supporting. I'm on the pension. I have no idea where it's going to go from here. But Australia's bankrupt. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Get used to it.